Welcome back to Everyday Economics, the podcast that helps you learn about the economic world happening around you every day. I'm your host, Chris Krug, president of 501c3 nonprofit Franklin News Foundation. Everyday Economics is a production of America's Talking Network. You can check out all of our great podcasts at americastalking.com. To support Everyday Economics, please make your tax-deductible charitable contribution by clicking the link in the show description. We are recording today's episode on Monday, July 10th. And joining me, as always, my friend, colleague, Dr. Orphe Divounguy. He's a PhD economist. Dr. O, Airbnb has been in the news. And really, that's not so much to lay a name brand on it. The short-term rental industry has been in the news, and people questioning a recent report that suggests that the air is coming out of that market. The select areas of the travel and leisure industry, and I'm speaking specifically of geographic areas, really struggling in year-over-year marks. This does come back to the housing industry because ultimately these are privately owned homes or financed homes that private ownership or ownership groups own and operate. So it's kind of right up your alley. What is going on in the industry right now? What do you make of this? Are these concerns that short-term rental markets are crashing and short-term rental property ownership is having a tough time?
First of all, I don't think I'm not sure about those Airbnb numbers. Like you said, I mean, people are all over the place with those Airbnb revenues, and I'm not going to comment on that. I just think it it's out there. Airbnb is denying the story, so I'm not going to comment on that. I'll tell you what I know. What I know is the leisure and hospitality sector has been cooling. And I think this is what the Fed wanted, right? We wanted a cool down, in discretionary spending to bring inflation down, right? The services sector was super hot, manufacturing, good services, kind of in contraction territory, services still rising, pretty high prices and prices of services, finally cooling. And so now you have this cooling that's, expected to help us bring inflation back down to the Fed's 2% target. I think that's what's going on. And so, right. And so that's the real story here. And so, yeah, I mean, does it matter for the housing market? Are we going to see a bunch of Airbnb operator, dump their units on the market?
Well, that's what the headlines would suggest, is that this is getting bad and it could lead to properties that have been used for, Airbnb, short-term rental type, vacation or leisure experiences, that they go from being off the market to being on the market. At the beginning of the COVID, the concern was exactly the opposite, is that people needed places to live. And meanwhile, everything was being converted into an Airbnb. Is that starting to peel itself back or wind itself back?
I don't think Airbnb is going anywhere. I think it's a great company, provides a service. But again, I don't know anything about their numbers. What I can tell you, though, is that we have, housing inventory in this country is somewhere like around 45% below where it was before the pandemic. And we're looking at, I'm talking about something like 800, 900,000 to 1 million units, existing homes, right? We know that as mortgage rates increased, existing homeowners pulled back considerably and are choosing to not sell their homes because, they have a very low mortgage rate. They're in a very comfortable position, et cetera, et cetera. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of those Airbnb operators are sitting on very low mortgage rates. They could actually turn some of these short-term rentals into long-term rentals. That's a possibility, which would be good for the rental market, I think, for long-term renters. They could sell their homes, which would be good for housing sales across the country. Will it bring a price crash? Absolutely not, because we're still so far below normal when it comes to housing inventory. So, yeah, I think the headlines by all of the YouTubers and all those people and the Twitter folks and all that stuff, overblown. I think that there's no crash in sight. And I think that, it's all good news. There's no bad news here. Of course, if revenues are down, for Airbnb operators, I feel for them. This is kind of the path, right? With leisure and hospitality cooling, it's a cyclical thing. It's not, there's nothing structural here. When the economy is booming, people will spend more on hotels and short-term rentals. That's just the way it works.
I think that might be what's lost in the sauce here. Is that, and the Airbnb became, and I keep just referring to it, they've done a fine job in branding themselves, that they have become ubiquitous with short-term rentals.
They're Hoover, they're Kleenex,
As I pull back and, think about it, and the numbers they're not in front of me, right? But I would have to imagine that there was a massive surge in people who just bugged out and went on short-term rentals because hotels were, in some cases, not operating at all or operating under heavy-duty local regulatory. And I mean, I traveled through COVID, with the exception of the first 6 months between St. Patrick's Day and maybe Labor Day. I didn't travel in 2020, and I've been on the road ever since. So I was one of the first people that kind of like really got back out there when, clients and friends and customers, were willing to have visits in person. And hotels were ghost towns, regardless of where you went. You could stay across the street from the White House if you wanted to for $70 a night, right? I mean, it was just, it was rock bottom. Airbnbs at that same time were going crazy because people wanted to get away from the cities. They wanted to get away from each other. And so the idea of being in isolation, I think, really drove up the short-term rental market in ways that we had never seen before. Now that is cooling off. Why is it cooling off? I think it's pretty simple. I mean, I went to a 4th of July party over this weekend, an Independence Day celebration. And I just kept hearing from people like, this is really miserable. We had to leave, friends of ours drove back from the East Coast, leaving at midnight because they just didn't want to spend the money on a hotel for the group, that they wanted to save that money. So they literally, and you know what? It reminded me of when I was a kid in the 70s, and my parents would do the same thing, because at that time we were in an actual recession. I think that what we're seeing is a pretty normal reaction and response to what's actually happening when you set the numbers and frankly the data aside and listen to people. Anecdotally, people are hurting out there. And I just don't think that they're going out and doing short-term vacation rentals the way they were the last couple of years. Stimulus money, long gone. Long gone.
But that's exactly it, right? It's cyclical. It's what happens. The Fed's raised interest rates. Inflation has hurt people, and now you're at a position where people are trying to hold off. They're holding off. We just had a podcast talking about the labor market. Job growth has slowed tremendously. Wage growth is coming down. It's still not slowed down to the level that the Fed wants, but it's coming down. And so people are looking at the future of the U.S. economy, and they're saying, is a recession around the corner? Yes or no? Should I be tightening the belt a little bit? And I think that's what people are doing. Services still expanding, but slowing down rapidly. And we're seeing that in leisure hospitality. And of course, that's going to show up in the Airbnb a little bit. But it's totally normal. And I think that, because it's normal, maybe the YouTubers shouldn't be out there trying to create fear.
All right, well said. For Orphe Divounguy, this has been Chris Krug. Subscribe to Everyday Economics at americastalking.com.